Alrighty. Hello everybody, I am Robert Hawes. I am the CEO and founder of Obsidian Research, and I'm also a cybersecurity researcher. And today we're going to be talking about an interesting topic that is going to be the bespoke moat. Now, I know this is an interesting term, moat. It's been in a lot of people's minds for the past couple of months, I would say maybe a year or two. Everyone's been asking the question, what is their moat if you have a business? I'm not going to claim to know the exact answer for this, but this is just my opinion and thoughts on the topic. And today we're looking at R&D labs versus frontier labs. This is going to be kind of a longer video. This is going to be probably about 30 to 40 minutes long. And they're going to be my honest views, and hopefully you learn some stuff about comparing specialist R&D shops' capabilities for orchestration systems against the frontier labs. Now, before we dive into this, I do want to talk about an interesting release. Anthropic covered Claude Security. So this is now in public beta for users on Max, Team, and Enterprise plans. So Claude Security allows you to scan your code in parallel, validate findings, review, and patch. So they're talking about penetration testing, source code review, vulnerability identification, all of this at scale within an orchestration system. The orchestration system is going to validate the vulnerabilities. Talks about a multi-stage verification process, with Claude challenging its own results before surfacing them. This is just going to be a scrutinizer or the judge concept, right? So they're going to have another Claude or another harness that basically scrutinizes or judges the output of the original findings, and then they do that a couple times, and they get to a point to where they have a valid working issue. I don't know their internals of how it works, and we're going to cover about that topic during the presentation, but I did want to share this. So look at some of the vulnerability types they're able to cover. They're looking at SQL injection, command injection, XSS. They have XXE injection. They have some path traversals, authentication bypass, privesks, memory safety issues, buffer overflows, use after freeze, cryptography, deserialization, protocol, and encoding. After the vulnerability has been found, I assume that the model is then able to apply a severity rating, high, medium, low. Finding structure, each finding contains the following fields. Here's all this information. Title, details, location, impact, severity, category. I'll explain to y'all how to build your own system like this, kind of at a high level. So you don't really, this isn't like too taboo or like foreign of a concept. I can explain to y'all how to build it during the presentation today. Frequently asked questions, scan length, how long does it take for their orchestration system to run, severity, configuration. No zero data retention. Anthropic doesn't support that yet because they need to be able to follow law, which I guess is going to be state, local, or federal law, depending on where you live, and then also usage policy violations. So making sure you're not using this for malicious purposes. Scan consistency. Scans are stochastic by design. Claude Security uses an agent that adapts this analysis to each run, reasoning over code context rather than applying fixed pattern matches. This is an interesting concept. What they're looking at here could be variant analysis. So they find one vulnerability, then they're going to be able to apply a knowledge base. So they'll have another agent that then reviews all the output from other agents and essentially says, hey, here's a pattern we've identified. Let's deploy a common static analysis technique known as variant analysis. That's all this is. Export findings. You can copy them, download them as a CSV. In traditional penetration testing, this would be the report handoff. Here's your report for a 3-4 week engagement, and then you move forward. Feedback. You can tell them how good or bad their analysis orchestration system is, and there's a scope of use. So, clearly, if you want to use this for malicious reasons, don't do that. Okay, let's not be malicious. But there's also a blog post they have going over it too that you can browse to. Blog. Claude Security is now in public beta. released April 30th, which is today. Says it's about a 5-minute run. I'd say read through it just to kind of understand what they're offering. Opus 4.7 capabilities they're talking about, which is going to be tied in with the Mythos. They have a video going over what it looks like when you browse to the online web for it, which is here, Claude.ai/security. They talk about kind of how it works. Some of the pain points they've realized is like detection quality is paramount. Teams have told us that high confidence findings are what really accelerates security work. This is kind of common knowledge, right? So if you're in a security engineering org in a company, you're drowned by false positives. Everything's a critical, everything's an end of the world scenario. It's tough. I'm not gonna lie, it's very tough. Claude's claim is that they have a multi-stage validation pipeline, independently examines each finding before it reaches an analyst, which drives down false positives, and Claude attaches a confident rating to every result. During the talk today, I'm going to teach you and tell you how to do this yourself so that you don't have to give everything you own to Claude. Right? I like it. Keep things on your own devices. These are not like, some magic hand waving scenarios of how to implement a lot of this. I'll walk you through and tell you exactly how to do it. Time from scan to fix is the metric that matters. Early users pointed to this consistently, with several teams going from scan to apply patch in a single sitting, instead of days of back and forth between security engineering teams. I'll be honest with you, in security, everybody looks at metrics, right? There's a saying that what gets measured gets managed. All right? So, and I've said this for a long time. I've told a lot of clients this. I told a lot of people. This is my view, is that just because you have a quick, ability to fix vulnerabilities does not make you secure. Security is one of those jobs where if you're on the offensive side or you're tasked to fix everything, it is a never-ending hurdle. You're just in a constant marathon sprint 24/7. That could change though. The future of all security could really change, but looking at time to fix from a scan result is not that meaningful. I mean, think about it, right? So you have hundreds of vulnerabilities in your product. You identified them all, and the next day you find 100 more and 100 more and 100 more. You just keep doing that over and over and over. But all it takes is one, and then, oh, wait a second here. Something bad's happening. So that's why I always tell people, look, even though I've worked in the whole penetration side of things, the offensive security side, what really matters is the defensive response. How do you build everything from the assumption everything's going to get compromised anyways? That's honestly probably the best way to approach a problem, is just assume everything's going to get compromised. What's the blast radius? How do we contain this? And what's directly in line next to get compromised or be attacked? What's that attack chain look like? And if you can visualize that and have proper controls in place to prevent a lot of things, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. So teams want ongoing coverage, not one-off audits. This is another good point. I mean, can't tell them they're wrong. They are completely right. Anthropic is right on the nail head with this one. So classical penetration testing is going to be about, depending on target, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe a month or two, depending on which type of industry you operate in. Other type of research and engagement or security type of research could be longer, depending on target and who your clientele is. But essentially, in the classical sense of penetration testing, you do a penetration test, kickoff calls, demo calls, debriefs, report handoffs, retesting, remediation. It could go from a week or two, 4 weeks, a month and a half. If the vendor let's say you're reviewing something and you found a vulnerability during a red team, and now your client wants to work with their vendor to get that fixed in their environment, that could push it out, another month, couple months. So the speed of all these things that are gonna, make operationalizing the security findings faster and repeatedly doing tests is actually a huge positive thing. I think it's gonna be a big beneficial for companies, right? This is actually a good thing. Now, let's see what else they talk about here. So like meeting defenders where they work. Like I said, I'm a huge believer in the defender side. I've never been in that side of the world though. I don't want to claim I've been there. Their problems and the issues they face are on a whole different level than as a third-party security consultant who comes in, tries to identify vulnerabilities, and then hands off a report and walks away. So what I've seen and what people who are actively defending those environments, I can't speak to that, but I think it's positive that they are, working with the more defensive side of the industry as well. That's pretty much it for their 2 blog posts. I'd suggest reading both of them. They do require that you use their online version, and we'll talk about that during the presentation, but let's kind of kick this off. So, the bespoke moat. Why the next decade of applied AI belongs to the teams who refuse to rent their orchestration. This is important, right? Frontier labs versus specialist R&D. Frontier labs are quickly and quietly moving the agent loop off your laptop and into their sandbox. The model was never the moat. This is important to understand. The model was never the moat. The orchestration around it is. That's the secret sauce. Your orchestration system is what's going to be the most sensitive thing you have. This could change in 10 months or a year, 6 months from now, who knows? I don't have a crystal ball. But as of right now, April 2026, your orchestration system is the secret sauce. And so this entire slide deck maps the new battleground, which is vertically integrated labs products on one side, and then specialist R&D shops on another. And there's a widening gap of customer demand that neither can fully serve alone. This is interesting. So the specialist R&D needs the frontier labs, and the frontier labs need the specialist R&Ds. So it's like both sides are benefiting each other, but they're also both competing at the same time. And depending on who you ask, some will say, you can't compete with Frontier. They have more money. I'll be honest with y'all. Creativity, innovation is not dictated by having access to billions of dollars. All right? In today's age, you can get pretty far with not having billions of dollars as long as you're building off of what already exists. And that's what I'm saying here. Like the orchestration system is critical. And if you don't believe me, I'll propose some questions and you'll be able to answer those yourself once we get to that slide. Let's look at this though. Absorbing the stack. The model was never the moat. The shift from local CLI to managed cloud agents isn't about convenience. It's about pulling the orchestration, the prompts, the sub-agent topology, tool design, eval loops, putting it all behind an API where it can't be inspected, forked, or competed with. The agent loop moves server side. Your repo visits their sandbox, not the other way around. Right? This is important, If the orchestration system wasn't that critical, they would have just baked it into their CLI model and then said, hey, run this locally and you're fine. But they didn't do that. I'm not claiming I know exactly why they didn't do that. This is all speculation. I'm speculating that the reason they did not bake it into their agent CLI model is because they did not want their competitors reverse engineering their Claude Code CLI tool, figuring out their orchestration, building a better product, and then going after their potential customers and clients. They knew this. Anthropic and OpenAI, they all know this. They know their orchestration of how they tame the beast, which the beast in this case is the LLM inferencing and the reasoning. How do we tame this? That's their secret sauce. So in my view and opinion, they're going to put that behind the cloud agent. They're going to move all of that off of your local desktop into their walled garden. And at that point, they don't have to worry about you trying to reverse engineer their orchestration system because you don't even have access to it. So yeah, it's interesting to think about. But a managed agent product. You have the customer service, right? Web UI, GitHub app, a CLI bridge. We can all see this already. You have the sandbox runtime. They gave us this before. Claude and Open and Codex, they all use their own kind of like sandbox runtime environment. The sub-agent topology. This is now going to be considered the kind of like the moat core. Proprietary system prompts. They are the moat core. This isn't something that's crazy. A lot of people who ship desktop applications that use AI products get their system prompts leaked all the time. Why? Because they're baked into the product. Why is it that Anthropic didn't bake all of their harnessing and all of their orchestration system into Claude Code CLI and then just tell you, yeah, run this Claude Code CLI command to do all your security testing? Because they knew it would get reverse engineered. They know this. They're not naive. And so then you have eval and verifier loops, self-correction harnesses as an example. That's all going to be considered moat technology or core. Then you have the managed tool ecosystem. So essentially it's going to be like no bringing your own tokens. You're just going to pay a subscription and then you get access to their cloud orchestration system. That's all this is, right? And the frontier models, it's just, pick whichever one you want, whoever you want to go with, right? So competitors can copy, kind of like all these things, right? Competitors can copy each other's models, their managed tool ecosystems, their sandbox runtimes, their customer service level tools. All of this can be copied, but everything that's proprietary, that's sitting on a cloud, can't be copied easily. So that's kind of what they're trying to protect against, right? And this goes for any business, not just cybersecurity, but if you're developing agentic systems of any kind, your differentiator is your orchestration system. How successful is it? How much does it cost? These are your differentiators. So let's go to the next page. This is going to be specialists to win on the parts a lab product can't ship. That's depth, transparency, and where the code runs. Now, the lab strategy assumes one orchestration shape fits every customer, right? So they're going to create their orchestration. They're going to have their self-eval ability to, start having a way to understand your developers and the code they write and the way they write it, the architecture, so that they can start finding more, maybe like logic-based vulnerabilities, right, in your products, and being able to apply variant analysis at scale is really what they're looking at. Here's the deal. That does not work at a large scale because you can't send your all of your code to someone else's environment if you're a business, like a large enterprise, and you're trying to figure out how do we solve this security problem. You're not going to be like, yeah, let's just ship all of our source code to these servers running in the cloud that someone else owns and manages. Let's just do this. It's going to have to be basically they have their own infrastructure, their own models, and they deploy it all locally on-prem in their own environments, right? So this is where the specialists come in. If you're a specialist R&D shop, you're looking at a specific industry, you have that expertise and that knowledge, and you're trying to figure out where you fit in today's world. Do this. Like, use this technique. You have the knowledge, you understand your business, the industry. You have to understand where you fit, right? And so if you're good and you're able to R&D and able to think critically and able to figure out, like, how do I make a better product that the output's better than the frontier, you're golden. You are golden, right? And just to show you all, like, if you look at my LinkedIn, there's a case study, Android penetration testing as a service. This is like Android mobile APK, automated vulnerability research. The entire thing was built with Claude and Codex. The entire thing. Due to my background, this is where it kicks in, right? Like, due to my background, I have the knowledge to know what to build and how to do it because I've done it myself. So now we're trying to figure out how to build that orchestration layer, right? So this is what you're looking at. You're breaking down the problem. You're saying, hey, what do I want to do? I want to upload an APK. I want to see vulnerabilities. So first thing I need to do is understand, how do I map out the attack surface? How do I map the attack surface? From the attack surface, then you need to figure out, okay, how do we go about, is it going to be raw binaries we're looking at? Are we going to be looking at, Java code, pseudo Java code? What are we looking at here? You need to figure out how to get your agents to do that, right? Then you need to figure out, okay, do we need to create hundreds and hundreds of different specialized agent harnesses for every type of vulnerability class? How do we have this system that says that distills tasks automatically to each stage? These are not, some secret, unknown techniques here, right? This is basically you taking your own experience and knowledge and then just putting it into a pipeline and saying, hey, I do this, I do X, Y, Z, then after X, Y, Z, I do A, B, C, right? And then just ask the AI, prompt the AI, hey, help me build a harness to perform this task. It's going to build you a harness. Test it out, see if it works. Take a known vulnerable application, see if it identifies those vulnerabilities. But there's a lot more to it, though, right? If we look back at Anthropic's situation here, they talk about validating findings, multi-stage verification, right? Claude challenging its own results before surfacing them. Think about this. That could be a scrutinizer agent. It could be a judge-based agent where you have 3 different judges, 6 different judges. You have whatever you want to call it, right? Whatever term you want to give to this behavior of analyzing output from a critical or analytical standpoint, right? But why even do that in the first place? Why can't you just spin up an ephemeral environment that has the build capability to build whatever you're trying to, run this analyzer on, that's working with open source code, or not open source, but they have the access to source code? Why not just build it locally? Give the agent the ability to understand, okay, how do I start drive these debugging tools and start using these tool chains to build the application, set breakpoints, actually validate the finding? They can do that. I'm telling you, they can do that. So, and that's why I demoed in the Android penetration testing as a service. It's a bespoke pipeline, multi-model routing, customer-side execution. It's because of my background. This is what I really want to talk about. What a lab product can't ship, but you can. So these frontier labs are going to go out and spend a lot of money hiring all the talent, all the expertise to build this, and then they're going to move on. Potentially. If you're an expert in any domain, take that experience you have, take that years of knowledge you have, and start applying it to an orchestration system, right? Something that's going to benefit, potential customers or clients. Focus there. Prove it works. Don't use existing stuff out there that already exists, because why? You're not going to understand the core concepts of why those products exist in the first place. Build it all from scratch. Build your agent, build your harness, understand how to develop an ephemeral service on demand. All of it can be automated using agents. When I'm talking about agents, I'm not talking about agents.md. Forgive me. I'm talking about agents themselves, like coding agents, right? The agents, so like the models, you can just use Codex, the command line Codex agent, to build the code to then have dynamically generated agents. Think about this. You can just use them to generate everything you need for your system. And then you just run it, tweak it, run it, tweak it. You just run, tweak. Identify all the things that you don't like, and then just improve upon it. The reason you're able to do that is because you have that domain expertise. And you're going to be able to move a lot faster, right? So that's kind of the depth side of the question, right? So I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this presentation that I was going to explain to you how to build these systems. And that's literally all it is just, self-validation. Well, why do you need self-validation when you can just go straight to the root cause of the problem, give the agents access to drive all the debugging tools, build the proof of concepts, validate the findings, and then there's no question at that point. There is no what's vulnerable, what's not. The next thing is going to be transparency, right? So this is going to be kind of tricky. If we go back to the previous slide, we see here that like the moat stuff is like your orchestration system, right? Now I'm about to tell you, if you're a specialist R&D shop, you're going to be transparent with your customers. You have to be. You're going to have to trust and give them your orchestration system. And you're betting on the fact that your technicality, your critical thinking, your ability to solve problems will allow you to continue to improve and maintain your competitive edge, right? This is important. The orchestration system, yes, I know on this slide we say, hey, it's the core of your moat. And then on this slide, I'm saying, hey, just give your customers all of that information. Be transparent with them. Give them the ability to see what's happening and executing. Because you want them to trust you to be their external R&D arm. And who's like why would you trust an R&D company, right, that's not being transparent with you the same way that the frontier labs are not going to give these companies the same ability to execute everything locally and have full transparency? You know, this is a dangerous situation. You know, I'm not saying this is the the most perfect route, but in my mind, this is what makes the most sense, right? Because like, you're going to build that trust through transparency and then showing that your customers that you truly do care about their problems and you want to solve them, right? And that leads into like where the code runs, right? So kind of like look at these other marks real quick. So years of domain R&D, the depth, we covered that. Replace vulnerability research, exploit chains, looking at, bypassing primitives, things of that nature. You replace that with any domain you're in. Multi-model, not locked to one lab. This is another benefit for, boutique R&D labs, right? So you can build orchestration systems that can leverage multiple different models. It doesn't have to be that specific model's capability. On-prem and air-gapped. This is critical, Not all enterprises are going to be like, hey, yeah, let's just ship all of our code to some other provider and let's call it a day. They're going to want to have those capabilities in their own environment. So they're going to have their own R&D shops, or if you're lucky enough, they might select you to be their R&D as long as you can provide the quality at a reasonable price and you're transparent with them, right? Because here's the truth, right? Like what's being created today can be created by someone else tomorrow. That's the speed at which discovery is now here for products. And it's due to AI. Make it inspectable or open orchestration. Customers can look at the graphs. They can fork the prompts. They can add tools. They can change whatever they want about your orchestration system, right? That's because that's what you're giving them. You're giving them that ability to have that trust, and they're going to rely upon you to continuously innovate, right? Velocity is important here. How fast can you continuously innovate to stay ahead of the frontier labs? And then finally, like benchmarks that matter. And some companies already do this, right? So I think like Expo, they're a penetration testing company. They went on I believe it was HackerOne or BugCrowd. And they talked about CTFs, or not CTFs, but it is like a big CTF essentially. But they took their Expo product and I believe it was at one point number one on all of HackerOne or BugCrowd. And that's kind of what they're trying to do, establish market dominance. Hey, we're proving this works. This is where we are. And there's no reason to say that, you as one person can't compete with Expo either. I mean, at the end of the day, it really comes down to trust, transparency, price point, and output. That's really all it is. And replace Expo with whatever leading product is in the industry you're in. Right, this is mainly just looking at cybersecurity. So a frontier lab optimizes for the median customer across every vertical. A specialist optimizes for one vertical deeply. That asymmetry is the entire opportunity. This is important. So then we dive into the labs encroach upward from the median, specialists pull downward into the depth. The gap between them is where the work is, right? So the red line, this is the frontier labs. They set the baseline. They create the models that everyone else is going to build off of for the most part. Now, if you have resources and money to be able to build your own models, you can possibly build a better model for security than they can. Me personally, at this time, I do not have the capital to do that, so I have to operate under the assumption of the frontier models, or they might use their own internal open weight, models, depending on whichever model type the client wants to use. Then the green line, that's the specialist R&D, right? So the frontier labs are going to come with a lot of capital, buy up all the experts, and try to distill their knowledge into an orchestration system to then compete into that industry. The specialists are going to basically try and come at this from a different perspective. They're going to target it from transparency with their clients and customers, understanding their customers deeply, and providing output that matches or exceeds that of the frontier. This is critical. I'm not sitting here trying to tell you hey, go build a product that's your own orchestration system, and then the output is just not great and not actionable by your customers or clients. They're not going to want to buy it. Make sure your output is solid, the price is good, you're transparent, you're honest, you listen, and you actually try to help them solve their problems. That is critical, right? And so you can see here the gap, where specialists get paid. This could be any industry, not just cybersecurity. These frontier labs are going to come for everything. They're not just going to stop at one. They're going to look at all domains, and they're going to slowly try to get their way into those demographics or those markets. Finally, the final slide. Don't rent the loop. The frontier model is becoming a commodity input. The orchestration around it, your sub-agent graph, your tools, your evals, your domain, is a durable asset. Lab products will absorb the easy verticals. The hard ones, the regulated ones, the depth-bound ones stay open. That's the opening, right? So, own your orchestration, rent the model, all right? Or if you don't want to rent a model, you have infrastructure and capital, you have your own models, or you're using open source models, own both of them, right? Sell where the lab can't go. As we've seen today, Claude Security, it's their infrastructure, not yours. So you can go air-gapped on-prem, right? They can't. Compound domain and R&D. This is for any domain, but cybersecurity for this one. Build your corpus, your primitives, your evals, your vertical needs. Every customer engagement should make the next one cheaper and sharper. So this is every time you deploy your orchestration system, you need to understand that, hey, this is custom tuned and built for them, but what are the takeaways that are more generic for everybody? Because those are always going to exist, and that's not just an AI world. That's even in classical penetration testing, there's going to be hiccups and things you hit along the way that apply to everybody, not just one client. Make inspectability the feature. Like I said before, and we'll always say, transparency, right? Be transparent with your customers. Give them everything. Don't hide anything, right? Your bet on your company and your existence and your future is on your ability to critically think about problems, your innovation, and how fast and what your velocity is to discover new capability. Stay curious, stay testing, and stay building. That goes for anything, not just cybersecurity. Stay in releases ahead. Like I said before, the frontier labs will come into an industry. They'll buy up all the expertise, try to enter that market, release their tool, and move on to the next feature. This is a common pattern. Happens time in and time out. This is critical. As long as you can continue to do your innovation, you can maintain a competitive edge over the frontier. Don't be scared. There's no reason to be. Just be curious, build from scratch, iterate, test, trial, and think creatively. If you're going to succeed in the future, you must be able to create what hasn't been created before. And that requires creativity and critical thinking. If you have to be told how to build something, I would be concerned. Okay? Have an idea and use AI to fulfill that idea. This is important. That's for any domain, not just cybersecurity. You have to be able to think about how to create what hasn't been created before, and no one's teaching you how to create it. All right? That's your secret sauce. Now, everything we covered here, all the way from the beginning, the bespoke moat, it kind of like ties in perfectly. I had this idea for a talk for a while now, and it just happened to coincide with the release of Claude Security is now in public beta, April 30th, 2026. And what's crazy about all this is that I built this entire slide deck with Claude. So I do use Claude and Codex quite a bit. And I think that from a vulnerability research perspective, a lot of these concepts they're covering are not that obscure, people. These are not really hard, right? So scan your code in parallel, validate findings, review and patch. You can automate this entire thing yourself. You don't have to do anything. You can literally just, what I mentioned earlier, and I've even talked about it in some of my LinkedIn posts. If you go to my LinkedIn, Robert Hawes Research, you will see that a lot of this is just simply being curious, right? And I'm saying, okay, like if I were to do this problem, how would I solve this? Right? So the problem, and one thing I'll talk about is an orchestration system that's fully agentic. Like we're talking like the entire pipeline, all the agent harnesses, everything is dynamically created by the models themselves. You're not really hard coding a whole lot of stuff. You're going to experience a lot of what's known as like drift or context poisoning, and this is going to occur, right, as you're getting into recursive subagent calls and everything else. One solution I use is just having a context verifier agent who's a meta agent who has their baseline agent.md or identity.md created by the system. The system then spins up a harness to use that verifier agent to then verify the context of every subagent called, and then compares it to the original goal for that recursive subagent execution. And then I have a weight system where, it automatically determines like, hey, like if this is reported, then it loses 10 points. And if it reaches a threshold of out of 0 to 100, if it drops down to like 80, then everything stops. And then some tasks, though, I don't want any drift, right? Some tasks, a little bit of drift isn't going to ruin the whole thing, depending on the stage of the pipeline it's in. But these are things that you can trial and test, like be curious, think about the problem and think about, hey, like how would I solve this? And then just have the AI build it for you. like that's the crazy thing about all of this. And it's a beautiful thing too. Like, personally, there's been all kinds of things I've wanted to build, but I never knew how to. And now I can have the power to create everything I could ever imagine. And I think that a lot of people need to take advantage of that. Take advantage of it now while it's cheap. I mean, $200 subscriptions to build anything you want to build. It is a amazing time to be alive, my friends. An amazing time. But just like I said, like in any domain you're in, the bespoke moat. Use your domain expertise and your knowledge to create products that outcompete the Frontier Labs output and also offers complete transparency to your customers and clients. That's going to be key. There are no secrets between you and your customer because your customer can also just recreate everything you did if they wanted to. So at this point, it's going to be interesting what the future looks like, but I think there's going to be a big change coming up where, these long drawn out service agreements for multi-year contracts and all this stuff might be looking a lot different in the near future. So just, if you have some customers and you already have existing clients, be transparent, give them capabilities. Otherwise, they will be able to recreate you in a weekend. Right? That is the reality. Be their R&D, be their external R&D arm. You let them lean on you for expertise in the domain, and you deliver. That's going to be the secret. But also, I just want to say, everything in this entire presentation is my own opinion. Please do not sue me. I can't speak on the internal workings of OpenAI, Claude, or Anthropic, or any of this stuff because I have no insight or anything at all. They're just my views and opinions of the situations and what's being presented. But other than that, yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of the day. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you.